You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We have a special guest on now. Lisa De Pasquale is a conservative writer, and she's been very well regarded, has written some many terrific articles and such, and happened to put a book out recently. And I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed what Ann Coulter had to say about the book. She says Lisa De Pasquale is one of the best conservative writers out there, and she says this book isn't just about politics. It's a fascinating and extremely personal account of her dating life, her massive insecurities, mostly ineffective search for God. And these are the words of Ann Coulter. And I want to welcome to the Final Say, ladies and gentlemen, Lisa De Pasquale, who is going to enlighten us to the fact that conservatives are actual human beings with real feelings. Are we not, Lisa?
We are. If you cut us, do we not bleed?
Let's hope neither of us has to find out in the near future.
It's funny because that you mentioned CPAC because, I was the director of CPAC for 5 years. And, there's a lot of, in addition to the culture stuff, there's a lot of background of, behind the scenes at CPAC in the book.
Well, now you just released the book on February 19th, correct?
25th.
25th,
so this
okay.
week.
Well, maybe I guess I saw the press release on the 19th.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and now what struck me, and this is part of why we were excited to have you on the show, February 19th is my daughter's birthday. She just turned 18. So, of course, I don't care whether you're a conservative, a liberal, or anything short of a rubber room asylum type. Your daughter just turns 18, and you start thinking about life, and you start probably a lot earlier than that, but certainly at 18, you're like, okay, welcome, now you're kind of in control of the big world. So I thought it was actually kind of interesting time for me, for me personally to interview you. So, you live life in the conservative sphere, and of course that we have this ridiculous diatribe, and based on everything I'm reading now, it looks like we're going to have a double down on the I hate women thing. So let's park the politics aside momentarily and tell us a little bit about the book. But as a conservative woman who spent a lot of time living in politics, what was the impetus to write this book, and how would you say it's actually affected your view of politics?
Well, I wanted to write a book. I've always wanted to write a book. People like Ann Coulter said, "Oh, you should write a book," and there was no political issue that really spoke to me. And then, over the last 15 years that I've been in D.C., I've sort of evolved in my religion from just being a Christian in name only to being an atheist, and then finally 2 years ago becoming a Christian again. And, looking back at the sort of connecting thread was, some of the different guys that I've dated in D.C., some involved in politics, some not, but oddly they were all different religions. There was an atheist, a Catholic, an evangelical, a Quaker, a preacher, and the idea for the book came to me because the title came to me first. And, I wanted to tell the story of, being a conservative in D.C., being a conservative that's dating, and then becoming a Christian. I wanted to tell it in a way that would be palatable to lots of women, not just women that were involved in politics. And that's why I chose to write, what they call a chick lit type of book. So it reads like a memoir, but, all the names and occupations are changed so that, no one's outed. And, I always say that, even though, I'm talking about a lot of the men in the book, and, most of them are conservative, I'm really the most exposed in the book, as I'm sure the quote from Coulter tells you. I thought it was important to put the vulnerabilities and my experience out there, because I think a lot of women, particularly young women that are new to the dating world, can identify with this, because it is a different world. I don't think just in D.C., but all over. When you consider social media and whether or not chivalry is dead, and whether people are even dating or are they just hooking up. There's a lot of stuff in the book that I think a lot of young men and women can identify with.
Now, the timing of writing this is actually pretty interesting, again, because we are coming around, and I know there'll be a lot of hype about the book in the next few weeks, but I'm sure it'll continue. These things tend to have, you do a good job, and of course you certainly know how to write. These books tend to live a little longer than just a few weeks in the press. Mm-hmm. So hopefully one of the things that people get out of this book is exactly as I was saying. Conservatives are, we are real people, and we do, and and we're also women. Not me, but we don't hate those who we are, who have mothered us, who we're married to, who we've raised, et cetera. But when you went through this book, now you made a mention to me earlier on that the comment was also made that it's pretty much a racy book, or it has some racy subject in there. Mm-hmm. So first I've got to ask something funny. The one thing that some of the best conversations I have had with women is when they tell me about the worst date they ever had. So please share with us. There has to be some really hysterical anecdote that won't give away the book, that maybe will entice people to read it and understand it really isn't just about politics.
Sure. Well, I, like a lot of people now, I had tried online dating, and on more than one occasion, some gentleman would see my profile, on Christian Mingle or eHarmony or Match or whatever, and would recognize me from CPAC because, as the director, I had some pretty visible roles, like introducing Rush Limbaugh, introducing Donald Trump, and just sort of being, identified with the conference. And, I think it's very typical. This story is very typical of D.C., but, there was one guy where I think it said something like we were a 99% match. And, he had a good job and the profile looked good. And I opened the email and, it's, hi, how are you? How can I speak at CPAC? And that's, I think, a big problem in D.C. is people separating, the business world from, their love life. And, for someone to come at me in an online dating site and say, how can I speak at CPAC, that's just not something that, I was on whatever, website it was, looking for. And then you sort of wonder, when you're in a position of some power in the conservative movement, in a city where everybody's trying to get a leg up, I mean, how do you know if someone's dating you just for you or if it's because, they want to speak at CPAC?
It's a bit of a sad commentary on relationships in general, but doesn't it teach you a little something about the game, right? Mm-hmm. How do you judge? I mean, there's so many people that we trust to deliver information to us or to make introductions and so forth. And of course, we're both old enough to understand and not be so naive that people always have an ulterior motive. Mm-hmm. And sometimes maybe the ulterior motive is actually to fall in love, but it does tell us something about people. Have you found in writing this book and exploring your own relationship, not just with God, but with people and how that affects, because people affect your relationship from a spiritual sense as well as your spirituality probably greatly affects your relationship with people. But mm-hmm. it has to also impact, I would think. I mean, you talked about how you dated a Jewish guy, a Quaker, a Catholic, maybe an astronaut and a shoemaker here and there. But what did you learn about tolerance from that, and what did you learn maybe about standing on your own convictions? And is there a way you can sort of apply that to the work you do in the political spectrum?
Well, I think with several, they were different, varying degrees of commitment to, whatever their religion was. For instance, the Catholic, even though, he did go to Mass frequently, and, did Lent and all of that, I didn't know that at the time that they sort of approach, people differently in that, I was sort of offended, even though I was an atheist. Like, well, why don't you ever invite me to go to Mass? And, that's more like an evangelical thing. And I think, you sort of read it as, well, don't you want to convert me? I think there was actually a Seinfeld episode about it when Elaine was dating, a Christian and, was sort of offended that he wasn't trying to convert her. And for the most part, everyone that I dated had we had similar values, and one of those values, obviously is generally being respectful of people of other religions, other faiths, except for the atheist. I would say the atheist that I dated was probably the most judgmental, of religions and other people in general. And I don't know if that necessarily speaks to all atheists, but, certainly in my experience it did. But, I think that you really can't put any stereotypes on any religion. The Muslim that I had dated very briefly, for Valentine's Day, I gave him a signed copy of Michelle's book on whether or not we should intern Muslims after 9/11. And he read the book and thought it was interesting, So, I think we have to be careful about not putting, stereotypes on anyone. And like I said, in my experience, the atheist was the one that did that the most. And all of them were conservative, so, it wasn't an issue of, liberal versus conservative. And to me, that's actually one of the great things about CPAC, is that you have people from all different backgrounds. Of course, the media B-roll is only going to show like the dorky white guys, but I think the book shows that there is a wide spectrum of conservative guys. There are creative ones. There's musicians. There's preachers. There's lawyers. There's PR people. It's a wide spectrum.
And as S.U. Cuff points out, some actually don't believe in God. I'm dying to jump all over your evangelical version of Seinfeld Spongeworthy, but I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that drop. We'll leave the raciness for your book. But I want to jump on this sort
Maybe
of
we'll call
angry,
it panel-worthy.
Fair enough.
Panel-worthy.
I have a fairly significant number of friends, dozens of people that come to mind that I would call religious radicals, but they are actually hardcore atheists, not agnostic, not open in any way to contemplating any deity or supreme being, whether it's in more of a scientific Mother Nature sense, or whether it's the old guy in a white beard with a carefully articulated, defined plan. They're just flat out. It's just random chaos. The irony is, as you point out, I have found some of those folks to be, even some brilliant businessmen and women and so forth, to be some of the most intolerant and radical people I know. And the irony is that in most conversations, I end up telling these people, you're the most religious person I know. Because think about most of those folks they have some other agenda. And the same way you might have somebody everybody knows the person they have who's so religious they drive you nuts, because you can't have a conversation about anything without them interjecting, an excessive amount of faith into it. And a lot of these people are actually like that about something else, whether it's the environment, save the blue-eared goldfish, whatever their thing is. And one of the things that I found from my first visit to CPAC, I'm a relatively recent comer to CPAC. I've done this will probably be my 5th year, and I found the tolerance and the diversity of the people to be virtually the exact opposite of what I have seen on MSNBC or CNN or any of the mainstream media in the reflection of the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for the most part that, the people, I won't necessarily speak to CPAC leadership, but the attendees, they're not offended by having, different groups in the exhibit hall. And, when I was there, which was 2006 to 2011, that was sort of the great thing about CPAC. And, we had over 150 co-sponsors and exhibitors. And, there were a couple of years when the ACLU was there. And for us, it certainly wasn't making a judgment on the ACLU. It was almost kind of funny if, they want to send 2 people there to get yelled at by 8,000 conservatives, good for them. But, I think that we have to get rid of this notion that, conservatives are, weak-willed and the ones that are getting the vapors and fainting over seeing atheists or gays or anything like that. It's the left that can't handle any dissent of any kind. They don't even have dissent within their own ranks. You never hear from pro-life Democrats. Those people know to, be quiet. Whereas on our side, we're always bickering, but yet, it's sort of seen as a negative when it really should be a positive. We're willing to talk with one another and, and still be in the same room with each other, or in the case of CPAC, still be in the same room and drink with one another.
Right. Oh my God, we actually drink too. Going back to your book, your book is really focused on the examination of dating as well as politics and faith. Now, when you look at this from let's say a faith perspective, did you find that you all of a sudden kind of woke up after examining these relationships and found yourself to be a person of faith? Or did you find yourself writing the book because you sort of had this epiphany and you realized that this is a pathway that I think other people need to understand? And I'll wrap that up in maybe a simpler question. Besides telling a compelling story, is there a lesson here, especially to young women like my daughter, for example? Is there a lesson here that you would say, all right, you're heading out into the world to find your own direction, maybe in spirituality and in life and in love? What's the lesson?
Well, about 2 weeks before I had to turn in the book, I thought I had the ending, and the ending changed for me 2 weeks before, and it was a lesson that I learned from the last guy in the book, and I probably shouldn't give it away because it literally is the last, the last page almost, but I think overall it's that a lot of times we are looking outside ourselves. We're looking for the Mr. Righteous, the Miss Righteous, rather than looking inward. And what is the type of person that the right guy or right girl would want, and am I that person?
I'm going to share a quick funny story with you just because I can't resist and because it won't be giving anything away. This is a woman I know. We were talking about worst dates fairly recently, and these were internet dates, from hell, basically. Mm-hmm. And what she told me about the guy she went out to a restaurant with, and he apparently they sat down to have soup, and the soup was served, and he was leaning over and talking to her and whatnot, and the soup served, and she looks down, and she sees all these little black specks, like in her soup, and it was a cream of, like a lobster bisque or something where it would really stand out. And she's thinking to herself, I didn't put pepper on my thing, and this doesn't look like pepper. And all of a sudden she realizes this was Mr. Excessive Spray-On Hair Thickening Texture Color guy.
Ew.
He was flaking in her soup. And she's saying, you want to talk about slowing the hands of time down to a nanosecond. Those thoughts you process about how the heck am I going to extricate myself because my escape plan friend isn't supposed to ring me for another 10 minutes. So I thought I'd share that.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I talk about in here in DC is that we sort of have a minority of men that are willing to actually ask women out on dates. And I've talked to, girl after girl, and they all say, you're right. There's this phenomenon of the happy hour email, and that's where the guy sends you an email, a happy hour, like, oh, this is happening, like some group is sponsoring this happy hour, with no commentary, no ask, just forwarding the email. And then the girls are sort of wondering, well, are we going together? Are you asking me to go with you? Are you just sending this as an FYI? I mean, it's just a transfer of anxiety. And to me, that's the perfect example of what happens in D.C. People come here and then they just sort of transfer the responsibility and their duties to someone else.
Now, D.C. is, and I don't know whether most of your dating has occurred since your time in D.C. or not, but D.C. is obviously a different microcosm than many other cities in this country. But from your experience, do you find, as a strong woman with strong opinions, do you feel like you're at a dating disadvantage to maybe just the average woman who's dating out there who might not carry that sort of strength of conviction, and that writers and other people tend to have strong opinions because guys tend to be intimidated by strong women? Or do you think because you're in D.C., guys are used to more strong women than maybe other cities? What was your experience?
I don't know if guys here are necessarily used to it because almost no one is from here. So I think I have heard from people that, some people might be intimidated by strong women or by me. But the one thing, I did an interview with someone at Breitbart the other day, and she asked a similar question. And I think the issue is that men shouldn't necessarily judge a woman's current ambitions. For instance, I've been in D.C. for 15 years. I've had, lots of, high-level positions, but I would give up everything to start a family. I don't necessarily want to be a career woman for the rest of my life. That's just what I'm doing now. And I think that particularly among conservative men, there might be this view that, someone like me, wouldn't want to stay home with children or wouldn't want to give up a career. And I think there's a lot of judging probably on both sides. The other thing is the other aspect is on the other side, and that's that, in a town with a high cost of living, some men don't want to give up the second income. They don't want, someone to stay home. They'd rather have, the second or third car and the nicer place and that sort of thing. So, I think it's probably hard no matter, which side you're coming from. And probably some of that is, filters into other big cities as well.
I would say, speaking on behalf of men, I think I'm reasonably qualified to do that. That you probably have a similar issue for men. There's a lot of men who women might look at and question, boy, does this guy have a soft enough heart, warm enough spirit? Is he going to have a tender side that I want? Because in a city like D.C., it's a Shark Tank. If you want to get it, you got to be sharp, you got to be dressed appropriately, you've got to be articulate, you got to be aggressive, assertive, or you'll get chewed up and spit out. But that kind of guy on the outside, and who may not be faking, it may just be their conviction at business and political acumen. You might have to peel back a few layers of the onion to understand whether that guy has the kind of spirit you'd want to curl up with a book over the weekend or by a warm fire. Did you have any of those issues that came up in the book where you found that guys who you might have had double or triple guessed yourself beforehand ended up being a wonderful guy?
I think that there were definitely some surprising aspects of some of the guys that I dated. Whenever anytime you're dating someone and then you're around them with a different group of friends, you sort of learn more about them. Like, oh, I didn't know that. Or, when you hear their friends' view of what they are, it's sort of surprising. I think, in D.C. or probably in any large city, or any sort of career that consumes you, I think it's hard for two people, particularly in the political world, or maybe even two lawyers, to really have a well-rounded relationship when you're both in the same business. For me, I've never really been that interested in dating, someone in my same career field because, at 5 or 6 or 7 o'clock, I don't want to talk about politics anymore. I want to do fun stuff. I want to do my hobbies. I don't want politics to necessarily be my hobby when it's my job. And then on the other side, if you date a conservative whose job is not in the movement and it's a hobby for them, they do want to talk about it. So, again, it's a weird balance of dating someone who, thinks you're an equal and dating someone that thinks you're a star. I've been in both positions, and certainly it can be hard to balance, someone that is interested in politics as a hobby and, still wants to talk about it after 5 or 6 o'clock. But for me, I've always sort of been interested in the blue-collar guy. I always say a plumber is more relevant to me than a politician.
Tactile men are real men. They're more in touch with the world.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, Lisa, I think you're a star. Looking forward to finding Mr. Righteous a great success. We're coming up quickly on the end of the program, so I want to ask how people, and just so you know, I posted on our site the link to Amazon.com, but real quick, website or Twitter or any place you would like people to be able to feed or to find you?
The website is findingmrrighteous.com, and on Twitter you can follow me at Lisa DEP, and you can also find the book, like you said, on Amazon at barnesandnoble.com, booksamillion.com, and I think in some Barnes & Noble stores as well.
Excellent. Well, Lisa, thanks so much for joining us on The Final Say. Hopefully I'll see you next week at CPAC. I assume you're going to be there?
Yep, I'll
Excellent.
be there Thursday and Friday.
All right. Well, listen, have a wonderful weekend. Stay warm, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for joining us today on The Final Say.
Thank you.